I'd like to now call David Ivester up here, as well as the next panelists, if they can come up to the table. We're going to begin. Our moderator for the next panel is David Ivester, a partner in Ivester, Briscoe, Ivester, Bazel. Anybody who's worked with David knows that he's one of the top-notch environmental CEQA attorneys in the state, and he'll be leading the next discussion. And we're missing a panelist. Where's Ellen? Here she comes.
So, having crashed and burned, now we're going to figure out how we're going to deal with this material. Wetlands restoration and beneficial reuse. We have some very knowledgeable, experienced folks here. First up will be Tom Gandesbery, project manager at the California Coastal Conservancy. He did a stint at the regional board before going over to the Conservancy, and he's now the representative for the Hamilton Wetland Restoration Project, a joint effort by the Corps of Engineers and the Conservancy. He'll start us off. John Bourgeois will come next. He's the executive project manager of the South Bay Salt Ponds Restoration Project, obviously in the thick of it. John worked with the USGS National Wetland Research Center in Louisiana before coming to California, and then worked as a wetland restoration ecologist at H.T. Harvey and Associates there in San Jose for a dozen years before becoming the project manager for the Salt Ponds Restoration Project in 2009. And then next up will be Dilip Trivedi, Vice President of Moffatt and Nichol. He comes out of Texas A&M University with a master's and a doctoral degree there. He's specialized in areas of sea level rise planning, wetlands restoration, waterfront development, and public access, and brings a lot of practical knowledge to this, as well as has been advising large-scale marsh wetland restoration projects. And then finally, bringing up cleanup today is Ellen Johnck, who, for folks who've been circulating amongst the Bay Planning Coalition events, needs no introduction. Ellen was executive director for the coalition from its founding up until a couple of years ago. She served at the California Coastal Commission North Bay region for a dozen years before that, and is now serving as a consultant, advising folks on wetland restoration and historical preservation, as I understand it. So, with that, Tom?
Thank you. Thank you for having me and listening to our hearing, probably for the umpteenth time for a lot of you, about Hamilton. It's a project that we've been involved in since 1996. So I've presented dozens of times, and I know a lot of you have heard at least one presentation on Hamilton. I'm going to try to focus just on the financial end and what has happened at Hamilton and where things are, we think, or we're trying to make them go. Given all the things we already talked about. Now, how do I? Okay, so I don't have any fancy PowerPoint. I'm not going to read a bunch of numbers off to you, but just so you all know, current status of things. This is a laser. The Corps of Engineers is engaged in restoring the airfield, which is just a small part of the entire project. They are working feverishly as we speak to finish all the construction out there on about 750 acres of real estate that the Conservancy owns. That was a base realignment and closure property that we got in about 2002. Everything you see, this is sort of the concept plan for the entire 2,600 acre project. 750 acres is going to be restored. They're going to breach that in February, and that's the good news. And we've got another, 1,600 acres to play with. So we've got a lot of land out there, and I'll touch on that in a minute. This project is a federal project, as was mentioned. It's a Corps of Engineers Water Resources Development Act authorized project. The Conservancy is a sponsor. We pay 25 to 50% of the cost share, and we provide the land. That's why we ended up owning all this real estate. Initially, the money came from little bit of state money, the planning that we did out there in 1998, 1999. That was funded by CalFed. Who remembers CalFed? It's another one of those government initiatives that's been replaced by something else. Later, Congress acted 1999 WRDA. That started the federal money coming in earnest about 2002. Hamilton was well funded through the annual appropriations from Congress, and the Conservancy was in a good place as well because the state the voters voted in a bunch of park and water and open space bonds, Prop 40, Prop 50, and Prop 84. And we, the state Coastal Conservancy, has access and is in fact the granting authority for those bonds, a lot of that money, and we use a little bit of that as our cost share. So my point, I guess, is on the history of this is that was when the state and federal government was rich, not like today. Who paid for it? Well, of course, it's taxpayers. I also want to mention, though, our first dredge material delivery came from these folks up here. This is the Belmar and Keys Community Service District. There's 700 homes there, and they have those lagoons, and they had to dredge them, and so we allowed them to pump their material over to our site. We got 400,000 cubic yards, I believe, out of that initial slug, and that came before the rest of the material down here. Now, as I said, they're going to breach the site this winter, but before we could get there, we had to fill the site up with dredge sediment. So this is one of those subsided baylands that needs fill if you ever expect to have wetlands recreated there in any reasonable time frame. So the project pumped in 5.6 million cubic yards. The vast majority came from the Port of Oakland 50-foot deepening project. So going back to how it was funded, and I mentioned it was we never had to cry to our local congressman about getting funding from the annual appropriations at the time. It was well funded, and I think that I will almost guarantee that is because our project was authorized in Word at the same time that the Oakland Deepening project was authorized. So there was when my executive director and the colonel and everybody else talked to Washington, they would say, this project is helping the Port of Oakland get deepened to 50 feet. So there's an environmental and an economic benefit. And now that project is completed and our airfield is about to be completed, we're in a different place entirely. So we don't have a big deepening project hooked to Belmar and Keys, and we have a lot less state money to fund it as well. Some lessons learned even before we got into dredge material delivery. The Corps was looking at efficiency. We knew that we wanted a long-term project here. We had the ability to take material from well beyond the 50-foot deepening. So in 2003, I believe it was, the Corps started studying something and came up with the aquatic transfer concept. And here's a schematic of that. 2008, the Corps published an environmental impact statement, and we helped sponsor that, so it's also an environmental impact report under CEQA. And it's essentially a drop-off disposal site. It's like a recycling center. Remember before they had curbside recycling, they had these places where you could take your aluminum cans. And so it's kind of like, take your material here, leave it there, and we'll make good use of it later. And that reduces the cost of offloading the material significantly. It works, and the Corps studied the numbers, and Moffatt and Nichol helped us out. on that study most recently. They've been running calculations a number of times on this, but most recently, Moffatt worked on that, and with the caveat that you have to be dealing with really large volumes of material to make it cost effective. We assumed that we could get most of the material that's dredged in the bay every year, and it would still take us over 10 years to fill up Belmarine Keys, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of up to 1,700 acres. So it could take 10, 12 years if you could get most of the material that's dredged in San Francisco Bay to this aquatic transfer site. And this aquatic transfer site would be in San Pablo Bay, very close to where the existing disposal site is now. The other lesson learned on cost is going back here. If I can you switch back to the other scheme? The little dark green areas there are upland transition areas. We didn't want to just have a tidal wetland site project. We wanted to also have areas that were a little bit above tides, that are a nice gradual transition. And now people are really focused on this with sea level rise, because that's where we think the marshes are going to migrate to as the sea level comes up. Just to make the point that if it costs a lot of money to get material onto the site, just to get it right below mean sea level, which is what most of the site is for tidal wetlands, it's that much more expensive to get it above tide. Another foot, another foot and a half is what we're talking about, but over the hundreds of acres, that's a lot of material. And we have to dry it out and bring graders back in and grade it and turn it into something other than just a pan. Otherwise, you just have a dried out, desiccated bunch of sediment. So that's an additional cost. And so looking forward with Belmarine Keys, this is the scheme we had in 2002, which shows 24 million cubic yards across the entire place. I don't think we will ever be able to afford that, and I think it's kind of wasteful in a way. We're going to have to be very careful about where we put the material and to get the most sort of habitat bang for the buck. And so, this sort of transitions into what's going on in the whole North Bay. And the Corps was, to pick on the Corps, because I guess we all get to pick on the Corps today. A few years ago, they did another 20-year plan for their dredging program, the DMMP, is that what it was called? And they made a list of sites, and Dilip and I kept saying, it's not about the sites, guys, it's about how to get the material to the sites. So as I mentioned, we have about 1,700 acres total that we could play with here. That's above and beyond the airfield that's almost completed. But just going around the bay toward the north, the Sonoma Land Trust and Ducks Unlimited are doing 900 acres right now. This year they're going to be starting construction, 900 acres of tidal wetlands, no dredge material there. Think of the capacity. Then you keep going around the bay, Skaggs Island, 4,000 acres of subsided baylands. I don't know the elevation, but it's probably at least 4 feet below sea level. Cullinan Ranch has already been mentioned. I asked Renee at Ducks Unlimited. I think she said 500,000 cubic yards is what they're looking at. Probably could be put more in there. And then we're not even talking about the South Bay. I've just mentioned the North Bay. So you can see the actual capacity, if you will, the need for dredge material to restore wetlands around the Bay Area is enormous compared to what's actually generated. And yet we still are having trouble getting it. We're still dumping stuff in the water, I guess is what. So I'll leave you with those thoughts. Yeah, that's my other slide. That's from when the government was rich. That was our scheme for Belmarine Keys and Hamilton, just showing different funding streams and relying a whole lot on Johnck. I think Jay's budget is right. Yeah, non-federal port, that's Jay.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks to John and Ariel for having us today. I think this is a really important discussion. I'm going to take a little different tack and just remind folks that south of the San Mateo Bridge, historically it was a very marshy, very shallow, very muddy place. This is some historical ecology work that dates back to the mid-1800s. A lot has changed since then, but a lot has remained the same. So we've developed right along the perimeter of the bay. It's no longer a marshy place. We've lost most of the marshes, either to development or to salt evaporation, salt production. But it is still a very shallow, very muddy place. So some things have changed, but some things haven't, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. So this is a map of the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project. We're finishing up our 10th year. The areas in green and blue are our project. So it's over 15,000 acres. It spans 3 counties. We're adjacent to 9 different municipalities. So it's a large project and it's very spread out. And each of those pond complexes is in a very different geomorphic setting. Not all ponds are created equal. And so we're also dealing with, especially in our far southern complex, the Alviso complex, really tremendous amounts of localized subsidence. Just take one pond in particular, right where it says San Jose above 237, probably in the back, you can't see it right at the bottom. One of those just average sized pond, 300 and some odd acres, it's 8 feet below sea level. So we need 8+ feet of sediment in that one pond just to get it back to marsh plain elevation and restore it. So we do have quite a bit of capacity, and we are trying to be very proactive, like was mentioned earlier. About a year and a half ago, we submitted a letter of intent to the Corps of Engineers that we're willing to cooperate in this beneficial reuse process. Dilip and others are actually developing a dredge material plan for us so that we can be ready as receivers and have our permits in place and understand the limitations we're dealing with. And they've calculated our capacity. And if you take all of the ponds that we eventually want to restore to tidal marsh and fill them up to mean higher water, you're looking at well over 60 million cubic yards. Yeah. And that does not include some of the flood protection features and these gradual upland transition zone features. So I think that's actually a little bit of an underestimate of our actual capacity. But I want to stress the difference between our capacity and our need, because we don't necessarily think filling every pond to the maximum extent possible is either desirable or reasonable in this setting. I think there are a few things that are preventing this to be done easily, and one is the fact that this is a very shallow area. When I show the map and I start talking to people in detail about our opportunity, everyone hones in on one pond, and I'm going to step out and point to that pond. People hone in on that one immediately because it's close to a deep water channel, it's easily accessible, and you could pull a barge right up and pump over into that pond. However, that's probably the last pond in our system that I would actually want to have dredge material. So it's the easiest, but it's probably, from our perspective, the least desirable. And if we look at our real need, it's in the far South Bay. It's in Alviso, where we have that really deep subsidence. But from the Dumbarton Narrows to the back end of that complex, where we have the most subsidence, that's about 6 miles. Very shallow. You couldn't get a barge much past the Dumbarton Bridge. Our other need is in our Eden Landing complex in the Union City Hayward area. But again, if you look, you'll see that deep water channel is closer to the Foster City side. At low tide, you still have a good 2 miles of mud flat you'd have to pump over to get material over into Eden Landing. So we have some real logistical challenges. We have a lot of capacity, but we have some logistical challenges. So let me tell you what I think our actual need is. Our need, and I've already alluded to it, is the far South Bay. This is the most difficult place to get material, but that's where our biggest need is. Like I said, we have ponds that are, 6, 8, 10 feet subsided, that we need really large quantities of material. I think our second need is in some of these features that can't be achieved through natural sedimentation processes, and that is some of our flood control features, whether it's levees on the backside, levee maintenance on the outside, or these broad upland transition zones. Someone on the first panel alluded to filling the bay to save the bay. I mean, that's the sort of concept we want to do on the back end of our marshes. We're going to require a lot of fill, but again, this is on the back end of all these systems, very difficult to get to. I think the third area where we have a need, and this goes back to my comments about the South Bay still being a very shallow, very muddy place. Even in our first phase of restoration, which we're almost complete with, and our next phase that we're planning, we're doing the analysis, and there is enough sediment in the bay right now for these to actually naturally accrete and reach marsh plain elevation. It may take a while, but they'll get there. So the concern is, how do we sustain that long term in the light of sea level rise? And our researchers are telling us, as that sea level rise curve is accelerating, our suspended sediment concentrations in the bay are likely decreasing. So for these marshes to be able to keep pace with sea level rise, they need high suspended sediment concentrations. And so I go back to some of the creative thinking that was talked about earlier. The Corps is modeling some of this placement, beneficial in-bay placement. And I think south of the Dumbarton Narrows is probably one of the critical spots where I think this is really feasible. It acts as kind of a lagoon system. There's a pinch point, has its own hydrology, and there's a lot of very deeply subsided marshes that I think are going to need long-term suspended sediment supplies in the long term. So we are enthusiastic about trying to become a beneficial reuse site, but we're fully aware that we face a lot of challenges, and we're looking at other opportunities. We're working with upland sources. You know, some of these transition zones on the backside, it may make more sense to use upland sources brought in by truck. Because of sea level rise, we're trying to act with some urgency, and we're trying to get these marshes restored as quickly as possible. So as willing a partner as we want to be, we're also not going to be waiting around forever. We're going to move forward with restoration because we can see some very quick, rapid sedimentation in the far South Bay in particular. So as far as who's going to pay for it, you know, we have this capacity versus need issue. You know, we're willing to partner and pay for those things we need. But if we're going to go above and beyond that, I don't know how we're going to do that. We're in a very similar funding situation with the restoration. The Restoration Authority gets funded. Someone said, yeah, it may only generate $10 to $15 million per year, and that's good for the whole bay. We're only going to get a fraction of that, and we're already quite underfunded with the lack of earmarks and the sequester, and we've lost a lot of appropriations, and the bond money's going away. So we're under very similar funding constraints. So I think this is a real opportunity, but a real challenge, and I'm really look forward to continuing this discussion and hearing creative solutions, which I hope Dilip's going to follow me and provide some. So thank you.
Well, good morning, almost afternoon. Thank you for hanging in there. Thanks, John and David and the URS crew for offering the facility here. I have a few slides here, 3 slides, so I tried to pack as much as I could in 3 slides. The very first slide, the top sentence is getting cut off there. But I'd like to sort of go back to what Tom had mentioned. The Bay Area has enough capacity. I mean, if you look in terms of capacity, you know, just the sites that I've identified, which are the Pelmarin Keys, Cullinan Ranch, Montezuma up there. I put in the dashed circle there, Skaggs Island, you know, if that ever comes. So plenty of capacity, over 20 million yards is a very conservative number. You look at the South Bay, again, the same 3 sites that John mentioned, Ravenswood, Eden Landing, and El Viso. And I'm calling those 3 as 3 separate projects in my presentation here. I think to call South Bay Salt Pond as a single project is too large of a concept to grasp, and so I'm calling each one of them a different project. So Eden Landing project, El Viso project, and the Ravenswood project. The center part. Thanks. So given all this capacity, can I pick this up? So given the capacity, and these are figures that are from the LTMS 12-year report. Very good figures, and there was a great summary of what has happened in the past 12 years. What you see in the figure is the blues, there's no pointer, but the blues are all in-bay disposal, which is primarily Alcatraz to a big extent, and the San Pablo, Mare Island, Carquinez Strait sites. The orange is the beneficial use capacity, and this is between 2000 and 2011. A big part of that orange between 2005 and 10 is the Oakland project, both the 42 and the 50-foot projects. And the reds are the ocean, the Dards disposal, which was really supposed to be a buffer. It was supposed to be a backup site in case everything is not available. Going forward, you can see what's happening, how it's completely lopsided. This is from the DMMP, which was put together in 2010. Almost no beneficial use because the sites weren't permitted. The glide path sort of transitions to 1.5 million cubic yards for Alcatraz, and then everything else above that is going to the ocean. When you look at maintenance dredging volumes, not by dredger as much as by the need, by the project itself. By and large, not surprising, the Army Corps dredges by and far the largest amount of material in the bay. These are, the shading is, it goes from 2000 at the bottom, the darkest, to 2011. So you can see the variation. The large spikes there are the Army Corps, and primarily these come from Oakland, Redwood City, Richmond, and Pinole Shoal. But not to discount what the refineries, the ports, and the marinas, but they're scattered. They're scattered all over the bay. A lot of it up in the Carquinez between the Martinez, Benicia, Antioch, Pittsburgh marinas, some in the South Bay between Oyster Point and Sierra. An interesting fact that I gleaned from Jim Hausner's emails, about half of California's O&M budget that is authorized by Congress comes to San Francisco Bay, about half of it, about $97 million. Half of that, 50%, goes to Oakland, Redwood, Richmond, and Pinole Shoal projects. So a pretty large number in terms of dollars that are going into, already this is authorized to the Corps. Not all of it goes into the dredging itself. There's a lot of testing, there's a lot of site design, management. A big number though, $45 million is being spent annually just on those 4 projects, not including Sacramento, Stockton, not including other projects. But when you look at it from what is maintenance and what is deepening, right? So on that figure up on the top right, the large spikes there for the beneficial use, that came from the deepening. So again, these the large deepening ones are the Port of Oakland and the O&M. But when you annualize it over time, O&M is about 2 million cubic yards of material that the Army Corps dredges in the bay. The ship channel is a separate project, so I wouldn't even, that'll never come into the bay. And then the deepening, which averages out over just this period to be about 1 million cubic yards a year. Now, Oakland has gone through much of its capital improvement projects, and that number is only going to go down from there. There are other projects that are coming up, Port of Redwood City, but it's not a large volume. If and when Baldwin ever kicks off, yes, there could be, that's a game changer, but that's also the kind of money that I don't think we have in the near future. So again, the point on this slide really is this bottom left, about 2 million cubic yards O&M and less than 1 million cubic yards going forward from here. So when you look at O&M versus new work dredging that has gone in, of all that beneficial use in those figures, you can see that it's between 95, 84%, very large numbers are all going in from new work maintenance dredging. So again, this is a congressionally authorized. These are our congressional representatives going to bat for us with earmarks. That's really what this is. Going forward, we know that these reds, the new work is going to tail off substantially. The blues are going to remain pretty much the same. So how do we leverage this? It's very clear that the take-home message, if anything, from my talk here is, I think that one sentence up there is that it's very clear that we need to have beneficial reuse of Corps' O&M dredged material, not the deepening material. And how do we make that happen? There are significant challenges when you pose that question. Will the if you build it come model work? It has. I mean, the Corps has gone to Montezuma. There's some encouragement from DMMO and agencies, but they have gone. Bear Island was a successful project. Cullinan, I put a couple of dots there. It's coming. But I did see that in the September's pre-solicitation for dredging of Oakland maintenance, it was included as an optional bid item for the dredgers. So yes, they will come if the cost structure is going to be, and that's the next line, how to get around the federal standard, where the federal standard compares Oakland to Dodds and Richmond to Dodds. If, and only if, and two uppercase there, if the tipping fee results in dollars that are less than Dodds. That's about the only way that the federal standard could still remain the same and the material come into the bay for some of these restoration projects. The challenge is not money, and it's difficult, but the biggest challenge in this entire scenario for the Corps to come to a restoration project is not the money and it's not the permitting. It is the very last sentence right there, how to address the offloading logistics. Who's going to build a site? Under the federal O&M program, local sponsor provides a site, or the Corps takes it where it's free. What we are suggesting for the work that we're doing for John is a contract offloader with a tipping fee model. Now again, this is very similar to what Montezuma is doing, probably what Cullinan will also do, but a step beyond what Cullinan is doing, which is not just getting a permit, but going a step beyond that and trying to get that into a construction package. So the take-home message, leverage every new work project for building infrastructure, not for bulk filling of a site. And if that new work project material can be placed in a manner that future O&M material can be accommodated there, it drastically reduces the site improvement costs for the future maintenance. And we have to incentivize it, and this is probably a private contractor, an industry. Let the market really determine what the cost is, but we incentivize it, and for example, a 5-year offloading contract by the Coastal Conservancy with a cost structure which is disclosed. Now we did that at Bear Island, and Pacific States, who's actually here in the room, won that contract. The bid schedule for Inner Bear Island was a single line item, and the single line item said how much is the contractor willing to pay the landowner for use of this facility for the next X years. About 800, I think 700,000 to 800,000 cubic yards have gone into Bear Island. The small amount of tipping fee that is coming from the contractor to the owner is going towards management of the site itself. I'm short of time here. Let me just go through the very last ones. Each 5-year contract could represent a project. Now, given the O&M numbers, 4 to 5 million cubic yards could be a single project, which could be a specific Eden Landing project, E1 and E2, for example. Bear Island, Montezuma, landfills, they're all models of what I'm talking about here. What is needed in this? The Corps' commitment needed that they will include beneficial reuse as an alternative. Now, they already are doing that, but the fact is there isn't. Cullinan Ranch is permitted, but the facility is not really there. And if you bid a job in September and the window closes in November 30th, there really isn't an opportunity to get an offloader built. Restoration communities' acceptance that the restoration dollars are probably better leveraged by building infrastructure. So the dollars that are going in are not directly going into a marsh that is going to have a success or a performance criteria. It's going in to build perhaps berms and flood control features and containment dikes. And regulatory agency support for facilitating permitting. And some of the stuff we've already heard, wetting drying has been a big challenge for a project. To continue maintaining water on top to prevent desiccation is a huge challenge on many projects. Decant water quality. And by and far the largest one, Jay's numbers were very telling. If a material is not cover, it is foundation. But if there is something between cover and foundation, and the cost structure of that cubic yard material is $50 to $55, and if that can be accommodated at some of these sites and put in a location which has 1 to 2 feet of cover, for example, on top of it, is it then possible to use that kind of material and not impose a foundation quality criteria on that site? So a lot of things that can be done, and when you look at it, you figure, holy smokes, this is where we were in 1990, and what resulted in was LTMS. Well, maybe we are ready for version 2.0 of LTMS, where these things are talked about, disposal in bay, recognizing that much of the restoration might result in mudflats that are outside of the levees that would be eroded. Well, can we transfer those mudflats in by pumping onto the mudflats and pumping the mudflats into the sites? Creative ideas like that. These are a couple of scenarios that actually Ellen will go through in the next one, but I just threw out a couple of scenarios. And let's just say Eden Landing Complex. If Alameda County, and she's going to talk about what that is, Alameda County and the Conservancy and Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife, partner to build the infrastructure on Eden Landing. The Conservancy lets out a 5-year offloading contract. Corps brings in maintenance material. And in 5 years, you have the entire Eden Landing complex restored. An alternative is, really I'll let this be talked by Ellen. Thanks.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, so let's get down and dirty. Actually, in preparation for my comments today, I was looking for my t-shirt that I wear on my archaeology sites. It's called Girls Like Dirt Too. But I couldn't find it, so just imagine me up here with my t-shirt on. My slide, I have 3 slides, and basically they're not as fantastic with the graphs and photographs as the previous, my colleagues over here, but I just wanted to put up some bullet points to capture my themes. And I have to thank Larry, Al, Bruce, and Brian this morning for really setting up where we are here. I mean, their comments I'm very much in tune with and thinking about this who pays. And the who pays, as Larry was saying too, how do we get, and Bruce too, how do we get the public, the beneficiaries of infrastructure more involved? And that's the people. The people. Most of our projects have been on the back of the federal government, and the federal government, of course, still has a major stake in this bay and in our estuaries and harbors around the United States, because they still are mandated as their mission to keep the United States healthy and with an adequate and reliable navigation system. And that is one of their primary business lines. Most of the dredging in harbors in the United States is authorized by Congress, and the Corps is actually legally responsible to carry out that mission. So we're not going to forsake federal government. Of course, we're part of that. We're the taxpayers in keeping up that mission. Of course, that involves dredging, and it involves environmental restoration, of course, which is another primary business line of the Corps. So getting more, keeping the federal government involved, yes, but my theme is how do we leverage, you heard Dilip use that word, leverage, in getting more folks involved, state, local government, and the private sector. So I'm going to talk about 2 projects, and I'm still just hanging here for a while to talk about how we really pair projects. And the time is now. Now we have 2 critical navigation projects. These are deepening projects, dredging projects that could move beneficial use forward with a cost-sharing proposal that over time will reduce costs, because we have been talking about how we lower costs. Of course, one basic thing is you only touch dredged material once. That's possible. But also, if we get some of these sites up and running, South Bay, Belmarin, Keys, then the initial site preparation, of course, and construction is expensive, but hopefully with partners and over time, its use, the price can be scaled down. So I'm going to talk about 2 projects, and then and we'll get down to the second slide. But just before I go to the second slide, another thing that came out in the front panel, and that was I'm just going to spend a little time on the permitting agencies. And I'm glad to hear Bruce mention, hey, there's some things that we can do to speed up. Maybe we have permits already for some of these sites. Is there a way we can save time and money by expediting some permits and marrying up permits that we already have for other projects, obviously such as flood control or wastewater remediation. The other thing, one of the things Congress has done for us is recognizing, and WRDA is a good example, that environmental restoration and dredging, they've got to go together, but the time for beneficial reuse is here and now, and we're moving on that. The Corps recently has put out new guidance on contributed funds, which will make it easier for cost-sharing partners to enter into the process of cost-sharing early on, and the ports on the East Coast have taken advantage of that, and I can tell you more about that. So let's go to the second slide, and I'll get into my two projects that, as I say, are here and now. And the key word here is linkage to linking up capital improvement projects with dredge material navigation channel improvements. The Corps of Engineers looked over 600 projects around the United States that have been on the books for years for navigation improvement studies, even ecological restoration projects. And they said, we got to scale these back. If there's no more earmarks, we've got to take some of these projects off the books. They came up with 40 projects nationwide that have excellent benefit cost ratio. The economics are good, more than one. And can we selectively get those moving in a 3x3x3 smart planning process? So what is this 3x3x3? Get these studies, these navigation improvement projects completed with the Chief of Engineers report in less than 3 years, under $3 million, and where there's vertical alignment between headquarters, division, and district. And also in a 3-ring binder that's less than 3 inches thick. What came out of that review? This was Mike Walsh, our commander, that was here at South Pacific Division many years ago. He was in charge of this. I worked with him in the American Association of Port Authorities on looking at these projects nationwide. We came up with 2 projects here in San Francisco Bay. Redwood City Harbor, which has been 100% federally dredged, federal project for years. And Mike Jerry's here. He can tell you the whole history of the port. You ought to look on their website recently. It's fantastic what they show of what's going on and what's going on in the future for that port. So Redwood City Harbor was selected as one of the 40 to get done on a 3x3x3. There's a whole process that involves meetings, what we call a charrette, milestone meetings to get this project done, and scoping done to get it done. What's the key to this harbor project, and I'll get into some deep details on that, is the only way this project is going to get authorized for construction is if there's a beneficial reuse site adjacent nearby that will make the cost of construction feasible. And really, it's up to the port and partners, which I'll talk about, to come up with the beneficial use site, because the Corps can't, under this scenario, to get this project done in 3 years and with the costs that they have for cost sharing. The other project is the deepening of the South Bay Salt Pond, and that's tied to South Bay. The other project is the deepening of the San Francisco Bay to Stockton Ship Channel project, which has been on the books since 1965, but here again, that's one of the 40, and we're looking at 30 million cubic yards from there to go to Belmarin Keys. 8 million cubic yards could get that site going, as well as sites in the Delta that we're working with the Department of Water Resources on. So just quickly more, let's go to the third slide, because I have 3 minutes, okay? These are my strategies that I'm working on for Redwood City Harbor. Who takes what step first? Alameda County has a flood control project. they've been looking at how do we provide flood control, both current as well as sea level rise. And I don't think is Alameda County here today? Because this is one of the problems, is that this is a key partner in this project to hopefully move the material from the deepening of Redwood City Harbor as part of the cost analysis in their study to the Eden Landing landmass outboard, which is owned by the Department of Fish and Game and has been under re-engineering in the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project. So who's going to build the levee in order for the Corps to issue a contract to someone who can take the material to a constructed site? And I'm recommending to Alameda County that they be the partner, that they raise their hand and say, we will build it. What's the incentive for them to build it? Well, they have free dirt. The other incentive is, well, can we find them mitigation for some of their flood control channels? I'm right now working with them to come up with mitigation, or let's say incentives, for them to come to the table and work with the Corps. Basically develop a memorandum of agreement, similar to what we did with Bear Island. Corps and Fish and Wildlife Service got together, brought material to Inner Bear Island. I'm looking at the same process for Eden Landing over in Alameda County. Belmarin Keys, the Western States Petroleum Association, there are 3 refineries that are part of the project delivery team and local cost sharing partners that are participating in the study for deepening the San Francisco Bay to Stockton channel. And right now, the issue of cost share, Coastal Conservancy, as you know, owns that site. And so we are talking to Coastal Conservancy about how the 8 million cubic yards can go to Belmarin Keys. The issue, as Tom talked about, the ATF versus offloader will need resolution, of course. So the other people that aren't here today, anybody here from National Marine Fisheries Service? No. I say we have to adopt a fisher person. That's one of the programs coming out of this, because National Marine Fisheries Service is key to this whole issue of ATF. How do we bring the fishery agencies involved in supporting our process here? They're absent. As I just said, Alameda County is absent, but we will get them there. I think we can work it. And I want to thank the agencies. Timing is everything here. If we anticipate this 3x3x3 project process, we've got to do it now. We've got to get a chief's report on Baldwin to the Assistant Secretary of the Army's office by September 2014. That has to have a site identified where we're going to take dredged material to for Redwood Harbor. So we're working on that, and as well as Belmarin Keys as well. So I'll conclude there, and if you want any more details, of course, I can provide them in question and answer. Thank you.
Okay, if you have any questions, please fill out a card and give them to John, or maybe we have several questions already. When we get through with those, we can take any additional ones people think of from the audience. First, for all of our panelists, is a very general policy question, and that is beneficial reuse the most cost-effective way to protect shoreline from sea level rise? And if so, or if not, what would be the most cost-effective method to protect the shoreline from flooding? Anybody want to weigh in?
It's almost too general of a question. I mean, the answer is invariably site-specific. You know, I mean, I could say in the far South Bay, you know, extensive restoration of tidal marshes may be the best way. We have a high sediment supply. We have, you know, not the big wind fetch that other areas have. So we don't have the infrastructure built right on the bay like San Francisco Bay edge. So I think it's a very site-specific answer. I don't know if anyone else has any.
I mean, I'd agree with John. I mean, you probably wouldn't be thinking, you know, wherever there is a fringe marsh and a dike behind it, which is pretty much all around San Pablo Bay and much of South Bay. In those places, yes, there probably is a benefit to having those fringe marshes supplemented to keep up with sea level rise. Where it's deep, where it's San Francisco, where it's the airport, the morphology really doesn't allow you to try and build a marsh in an area which is very rough.
I was just going to add, if you haven't already, there's it used to be called PRBO, Conservation Science, now called Point Blue. I don't know if anyone from that organization's here, but they did some modeling that they have on their website that can show you sea level rise scenarios given low sediment supply and high sediment supply and the range of sea level rise in the next 100 years. And basically the whole North Bay goes underwater. So that kind of concern, plus just the current flooding we have on Highway 37, prompted UC Davis and Caltrans to put together some workshops 2 years ago. I think we had 6 of them up there with the local agencies trying to get some interest around what do we do with the highway. And I think the consensus was you got to raise that thing because it's already getting high tide, storm surge kind of stuff in certain spots. And think about the levee that you would have to build, I guess, eventually on both sides of the highway to protect it. In some places, it's below sea level already. So, and who pays for to keep the highway dry? The farmers, not Caltrans. But anyway, it's a small cost. But that's a place where you can really let your imagination run wild because if you raise the highway and dealt with the railroad, don't forget there's also an active railroad there. Then the sea level and the water, there's all kinds of things you can do, and it just frees things up immensely. And it might look something like the YOLO bypass if you did that. But anyway, it's just kind of fun to think about. If you can find something fun about sea level rise.
So I'm hearing sometimes and it depends. Another general policy question. Could any regulations be changed to lower the cost of beneficial reuse, and if so, specifically what?
I'll take that one as the non-engineer. If you, and I just go back to, you always kind of track, if you don't have any expertise or training like I do, go back to your, what do you do at home, and digging in the garden. And no one likes to dig dirt. Dirt is just inherently hard to move. And when it's underwater and it's a soupy mess, it's even harder. And so I just don't think, I think the problem here is that dredging and moving sediment is just inherently energy intensive and therefore expensive. And what we've been doing at Alcatraz is basically flinging the dirt over the fence. It's always going to be cheaper than trying to recycle it, which is all we're trying to do with the beneficial reuse is recycling.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to it. The goal over the next few years is really to try and make our dollar go farthest in getting our channels dredged to what they are authorized to, and at the same time to reuse the material so that we get the benefit from the restoration, from climate change perspective. It doesn't, now, so what is the target cost for a beneficial reuse project? It only needs to be at or below what the current standard is. The current standard has been established for the past few years to be DARTs. Now, if it is less than that, we have a project. The Corps would not be opposed to taking it to a reuse site if it's going to cost them the same. Now, with the savings in there, and with the tipping fee model that I was talking about, that saving could then be transferred over, perhaps, to dredging more volume to get to authorized depths, so you bring larger volumes, or to use that fee for constructing improvements on the project itself. So that gets you ready for the next episode of maintenance dredging.
I guess my thought on this, I was thinking environmental regulations, and of course, Dilip, you mentioned the issue of the wetting and drying of sediments. I wish the agencies could establish a template for how we're going to be dealing with criteria for deciding how long to let material, stay wet, right? It took, 2 years, I think, Eric, or more, for the permits to be issued to Fish and Wildlife Service to accept material at Inner Bear Island. And I mean, if we were operating that, the Redwood Harbor's O&M dredging under a 3x3x3 process, which we're doing the deepening on, we would miss the time. We would miss the time. We would miss the whole project. So, I mean, that took a long time for the agencies to decide. And of course, you got to move material when it's more dry than wet. I'm not out there driving a cat, but at least that's been my experience. And what helped speed that up was another infrastructure project here again, which was the force main for Redwood City South Bay System Authority. But I guess if you look at regulation to lower the cost, is to make sure you don't miss your window altogether of doing the project. So I would look at what can we do to still manage the environment protection aspect, but get something done faster. And of course, dredged material is still considered a waste in state law. If anybody wants to take a run at that, we took a run at that many years ago. We put a one-liner in the state law that says sediment dredged from navigation channels is not a waste. And we ended up with about 3-foot-high stack of amendments to it. What about when it is a waste? Well, the state of New Jersey did adopt a law that said it's a resource, and let's use it in a way that's beneficial. So that's another aspect of this discussion.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I'll just add 2 cents. It really depends on the scope that you want to tackle that. You could look at the existing regulatory structure and think of a few changes here and there, or you could just step back and look at the amazing complexity of it and contemplate that there's got to be a better way to do it, and maybe it involves fewer agencies and fewer steps, and but yet you still get an intelligent, well thought out result. It's maybe we could have an entire conference on just that. Here's a practical question directed to Dilip, dealing with essentially economy of scale, and that is what total yardage or ballpark of yardage would be required to amortize the cost of building and operating an offloading facility?
Hamilton, 5 million yards. I mean, that was a perfect example of a project that was sized for, there are nuances in there because of the high cost related to Hamilton was only because of the fact that there was only one project going there. And the way the contracting was structured, we could have a whole conference about that. I think much of the value engineering session that was done at one point dealt with the contracting mechanism of how to pay for dredge material. But if an offloader can be kept busy all the time, your unit rate cost drops substantially. So it's the volume of material that goes through the offloader that is going to determine what is going to be needed to amortize it. Depending on the distance, Hamilton was, I think, on the higher side. It was about a 5 or 6 mile pump. The mobilization cost only for the Hamilton project was $20 million. There was just the mobilization. So if that, and that's without a single yard being pumped. Following up on what Ellen also mentioned, there are certain regulatory constraints that if they are eased, it drops the cost tremendously. And these are related to the wetting and drying issue. Do we really need to keep material wet for a period of a year, given that we have a 6 month of 6 to maybe sometimes 8 months of no dredging being done in the bay, and we need to keep the site wet, recognizing that there is another layer of material that's going to be put in next year. Do we need to keep it wet? One. The second one is decant water quality. If there is an offloader operating in the bay and it is a 7-Eleven kind of model where anyone can come, you just have to negotiate with the offloading contractor, will a large contractor who did not win the offloader contractor come to that site? And the answer to that is, well, I mean, again, it depends on the on the economics. But there is, with DARDs, a very high certainty that there aren't any restrictions at the DARD side. It's just weather delays. But once you're are dealing with weather, there really isn't any other constraint. You come to an upland site, you've got pumping issues, you've got clogging in the offloader, you've got decant water quality that needs to be met. And so there's a lower reliability in that project continuing for a long period of time. And so a bidder may potentially take the bite and go off to the DODs over coming to offloader if it is a very close cost. So really that's where encouragement from DMMO, like they have been doing in the past few years, I think helps. I think getting the experience from the two projects, Montezuma and Hamilton, I think really helps. But it is not a 1 million to a 2 million. That's why I picked a number of 5 years as a minimum contracting period to amortize, which would be in the neighborhood of, if only Richmond and Oakland can come to Eden Landing, it would be about 1 million, and Redwood City, of course, it would be about 1 million yards per year, 5 years. Hopefully at that point, when it is functioning, you can get the Oyster Point marinas, and you can get the Port of San Francisco and the Larkspur all come in at the same time.
Okay. And finally, there's a question that's prompted by a comment by Ellen. The question's really for the entire panel, though. And that is, the comment was about bringing the National Marine Fisheries Service to the table and the broader need to re-engineer thinking, agency thinking about permitting of beneficial reuse, streamlining, et cetera. The question prompted by that comment is, how about bringing together Bay Area municipalities and developers and contractors that rely upon dredging to fund one dedicated position at each regulatory agency to address dredging and beneficial reuse projects only? Stunned silence.
Membership fee.
I just want to, and I've been working this day to day, but well, I've heard about this for years. It's the Section 7 consultations take too long, and they're understaffed on the fisheries side and salt marsh, and that's a state fish and game now, Fish and Wildlife Service agency, department, whatever they are. There is some movement. I know U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service just had a press release on the salt marsh restoration. What do they call it? Recovery plan. Thank you. Which tries to look at the thing holistically instead of just on a species by species basis. Is that your understanding? I think that's the intent of the recovery plan. So look at the whole marsh, and that's kind of been the problem. I think is that. When you go to the agencies, primarily the Corps for a private dredging permit, when the Corps issues a permit, they have to consult, or BCDC has to consult, or the Water Board. They have to consult with these agencies on endangered species, and the person assigned to that at that agency has only one charge, and that's to protect that one species. And you can say, and we've said with Hamilton, but we're restoring all this marsh, and that's going to help the species out. But the focus is too narrow, and it isn't on holistically. So I think if we can even go further toward that, and maybe that recovery plan will help. I don't know. It seems like it's a step in the right direction.
And Alan, I don't know if you want to comment on the specifics of that question, but the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, we actually have a regulatory work group, and we meet with our regulators on an annual basis. We keep them updated on how things are doing that they've already permitted and what's coming down the road. And so even with the benefit of all this restoration, we've been told point blank by the National Marine Fisheries, don't even consider an aquatic transfer facility. Yeah. So on multiple occasions, they've been quite adamant about that. So I do think even with the benefits of a large restoration project and being able to look at a larger landscape benefits, there's still a lot of hurdles to features like that.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great idea, and it's not necessarily a new one. Actually, I remember, this has got to be 20 years ago, I think it was the Portland District, the Army Corps here now, that had a position called Agent of Change. And that was dedicated to these kinds of things. I don't know what's happened to that person. Maybe that's a person, yeah. But I just want to say what I'm kind of another jab or cut at this idea is for the Stockton project, dredging, deepening study, I said to NIMS, and I went to the governor on this as well. I went to NIMS and the governor's office and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and of course the governor played into the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I said, if we're going to come to consensus on species impact for dredging 75-mile long shipping channel, what I'm going to do is convene a technical expert panel of independent, holistic thinkers who are knowledgeable, have credibility with their peers on the subject. I don't want to get into a fight between it's my salmon, it's your delta smelt, it's your longfin. I didn't want to go there. So, so I proposed this panel, and I went all around. I went through San Francisco Estuary Institute. I went to the Interagency Ecological Program, and of course the new entities up in the Delta. I collected all the names, the best ever. And I have a panel that's convened on supposedly independent holistic thinkers, and we have a whole agenda. I also did it for salinity discussion. And these folks are supposed to come up with an agreement on species impact from this particular dredging project and mitigation options. And then we're going to negotiate. So we'll see how it comes off. But that's another way of tackling this issue where NIMS is, all they want to do is just consult and that's it.
But I guess where I was going with it is it's a policy issue for that agency that they're not looking at things holistically, or that's our view anyway, that they're looking at too narrow, trying to protect the one fish from the immediate impacts of, say, with the aquatic transfer facility, it's a suction dredge. And we know the suction dredges are still operating in the bay, but we want to put a new one out there to kind of run continuously to mine the disposal site. And there's a very small chance, I suppose, maybe there's a tiny chance that we'll suck a fish up once in a while. But we're creating 1,600 acres of habitat, much of which will benefit the fish. But it isn't today, it's like in the next 10 years. So they have to look at it in a much bigger picture. But, and that's an agency. It seems to me they don't need a change in the law so much as a change in focus or policy.
Yeah, and within the agency. I still think that needs to happen. And maybe we need to do this process for the ATF. I mean, right now we've got that problem. I know, but yeah. So it was a good point, whoever made that, yeah.
Any further questions, comments, last thoughts? Hearing none, then please join me in thanking Tom, John, Dilip, and Ella.